There are moments in your life where something starts changing inside you before you even have words for what's happening. Nothing has necessarily gone wrong. Your life might still look exactly the same, but somehow it doesn't feel the same anymore. And what makes that really confusing is that the things you've built might still be good. They might still work. People might even tell you how successful you are. But underneath all of that, there's this growing sense that you're becoming someone those things were never built for. And that's an uncomfortable place to be, because nobody really tells us that growth can feel like grief, that becoming more yourself can mean letting go of a version of yourself that got you here. That's what I want to explore today. Welcome to the Soulful Success Podcast. I'm Kyle Diot, a mentor and guide for those who have built a successful life but know there's a more authentic way of living. Together, we'll explore how to understand yourself more deeply, trust yourself more fully, and create success that's an authentic expression of who you are. This is a space for people who know that success isn't about doing more, it's about becoming more of who you truly are. If something in your life has started to feel off, but you can't explain why, it might not actually be a problem to fix, it might just be growth asking something of you. Now, there's a specific feeling that shows up when you've outgrown who you've been. And it's not dramatic, it doesn't arrive all at once. It's something that builds slowly, quietly, until one day you notice that it's been there for a while. And the strangest part is that everything on the outside looks exactly as it should. But internally, you're feeling that something is shifting, quietly, persistently, in a way that's getting harder to ignore and harder to explain. That shift shows up as a disconnection between who you are now and the version of yourself that you've been performing. You go through the motions and realize somewhere along the way that the motions stopped requiring you to actually be present. And when you sit with it long enough, you can feel it in your body too. There might be like a constriction or like a tightness, not a pain, but more like a feeling of wearing something that just no longer fits. And you can still move in it, but it's just not comfortable for you anymore. What makes this particularly confusing is that you're good at it as well. And you're probably really good at it. You spent years becoming this version of yourself. People depend on you for it. Your life has been organized around it. The relationships, the roles you occupy, the way people know you, all of it is built around who you've been. And so you keep going. And not because it feels right, but it's because something that you're good at and something you developed. And because people need you to be that person. Because walking away from something that you've mastered and created feels irresponsible, even when staying feels increasingly wrong. And you might not even be fully conscious of all this yet. It might just be a restlessness that you can't quite name, a lack of excitement that you keep explaining away, a sense that something is missing without being able to pinpoint what that actually is. But the body knows. That tightness knows. The quiet absence of aliveness in something that used to feel meaningful, that knows too. You can be really good at something and it still not be for you. Those two things can both be true. And here's what makes it harder is that most people never give themselves permission to believe that. The belief running underneath is that if you've built something, mastered something, become known for something, then you owe it to everyone around it to keep being that person. That belief is what keeps people in something they've outgrown long after the signal to move has arrived. And yet, despite that belief, something still shifts. Growth has a way of arriving, whether you're giving yourself permission for it or not, whether you're ready for it or not. The catalyst rarely arrives as a clear realization. It's often much more subtle than that. A feeling that's been building underneath for a while. A knowing that something can't stay the same, even before you can name really what needs to change. It's not intellectual. You don't have to think your way into it. You really have to feel it. You feel it in the body, in the restlessness, in the quiet absence of something that used to be there. That excitement, that aliveness. And the first response for most people is really just to dismiss it, to explain it away, to tell themselves that, hey, it's just been a bad week, a bad month. I'm in a phase that will pass. Because acknowledging it means something has to change. But it doesn't pass, it stays. And eventually it starts to surface as questions. Questions you haven't asked yourself before or haven't let yourself ask. Was this actually the right path for me? Did I choose this or did I fall into this? Is this really who I am? Or is this who I became? Those questions are uncomfortable because I don't have clean answers. And because sitting with them means acknowledging that something you've built, something you've been known for, something you've put a lot of time into and people depend for you, might not be fully yours. And the questions aren't a sign that something went wrong. They're the first sign that growth is asking something of you. And alongside those questions, something else starts to emerge, a pull towards something different. Not a plan, nothing that's that clear yet, but just a sense that there's a version of yourself on the other side of this that just feels a bit more true. And that pull is important because it's what transforms the questioning from just discomfort into something with direction. Without it, you can spend a long time sitting with what no longer fits without ever moving toward what does. And at some point, the questioning and the pull collide, and a decision starts to form. Not always consciously and not always cleanly, but there's just something that shifts from, I don't know if this is right for me, to, I need to find out what is right for me. And you need two things to happen for growth. There's the felt sense that something needs to change, and some sense of what you're moving towards. So, some sort of vision. And that's when the real discomfort arrives. Not the restlessness of before, but something sharper than that. Maybe anxiety. Who am I if I'm not this? There's going to be grief for what you're letting go of, even if it no longer fits. And it's really disorienting, and it comes from stepping outside of something that you've been in for so long that just felt like who you were. And so there's that anxiety and that grief, that confusion. Those aren't signs you're making the wrong choice. They're what growth actually feels like from the inside. They're signs that something real is shifting. So when you are growing, the growth is going to trigger anxiety, grief, and confusion. Not because you're going the wrong way, but because you're genuinely becoming someone new. And that's all part of the process. It can be scary for people to grow into someone new. And there is going to be the grief because you are grieving the loss of who you have been, the life that you have created while you're stepping into something new. And of course, the confusion is going to be there because there's uncertainty. A lot of people hang on to their present identities because they know what to expect, even though it may not be what they want. And they're scared of the uncertainty of moving into the new. But that newness is where the new identity arrives and where it grows and where it flourishes from. So for an example, let's think about someone who has always been the caretaker in their relationships. The one who holds everything together, the one that everyone leans on when something gets hard. They got really good at it, and they were able to start anticipating what others needed, showing up before they're even being asked, and being the stable one, the reliable one, the one that never falls apart. And for a long time that felt meaningful. It felt like that's who they were. But somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like a choice and it started feeling like an obligation. Like they couldn't show up any other way because everyone around them had come to expect this version of them. And then there was a restlessness that started quietly, a tiredness that rest just didn't fix, a sense that they were giving everything, and somewhere that in that giving, they just kind of lost track of themselves. And then the question started: was this ever really mine? Did I choose this, or did I just become it? Who am I when I'm not holding everything together for everyone else? Those questions are uncomfortable, but they're not a problem. They're the beginning of something, the first signals that they had outgrown the version of the life that they'd been living from. Once you can see what you've outgrown, The next question isn't what to do, it's whether you're willing to let the process of becoming be uncomfortable for a while. The first thing that has to happen is acceptance. Not acceptance of staying, the acceptance of what you've built. Recognizing that the choices that got you here made sense at the time. That the version of yourself you've been living from wasn't wrong. It was right for where you were. And that might sound simple, but for a lot of people it isn't. Because there's a tendency to look back at what you've built and feel like you should have known sooner. Like you wasted time, like you should have chosen differently. And that's where self-compassion comes in. Not as a concept, but something that's practical, something that you do for yourself. The ability to look at what you've created and say, this made sense. I did the best I could with what I knew, and now I know something different. And we need to give ourselves time to sit with that and allow ourselves time to let that settle in us as well too. Because without that compassion, the energy that's needed for growth gets spent on self-judgment instead. And the self-judgment keeps you anchored to the past rather than moving towards what's next. You can't grow into something new while you're still punishing yourself for what you've built. Then there's the grief. And this is worth sitting with because most people don't expect it, or they feel it and they think that something's wrong. Grief shows up when you're letting go of something that was real. Even if the identity was no longer fitting for you, it gave you something. It was part of how you understood yourself. It was how other people knew you. And letting go of that, even consciously, even willingly, it does come with a loss. You might grieve the version of yourself that was certain about what they were doing, the clarity of knowing exactly who you were and what your role was, the comfort of being recognized and depended upon. And that grief is not a sign that you're making a wrong choice. It's a sign that you're taking the change seriously. It's what's honoring what you're releasing actually feels like. And grief isn't the opposite of growth. It is definitely part of it. You can't step fully into who you're becoming without acknowledging what you're leaving behind. And that's where the actual work of becoming begins. And it doesn't happen all at once. It happens through small moments of choosing differently, trying something unfamiliar, showing up in a way that feels new, even when it doesn't feel natural yet. Each time you do that, each time you make a choice that reflects who you're becoming rather than who you've been, something accumulates. Evidence. Not confidence yet, but proof that the new version of you is possible, that you can exist differently. That's what's available. This is how self-trust builds in the process, not through certainty. Through small, consistent acts that show you over time that you're becoming someone new and that's real. You don't wait until you feel like the new version of yourself to start acting like them. You act like them until you feel like that person. And you don't do this alone. The people around you are built for the old version of you. When you start to show up differently, that creates disruption. Some relationships will shift. Some people won't know how to respond to who you're becoming. And what helps is finding people who recognize and support that new version of you that's emerging. Not to validate the change, but to reflect back to you when you can't see it to yourself. To remind you that you're becoming someone new, and even when it doesn't feel solid yet. You can't outgrow a new version of yourself in isolation. The people around you either reinforce who you've been or reflect who you're becoming, and that matters. What becomes available on the other side of this isn't just a new direction. It's a different relationship with yourself. The discomfort, the grief, the small acts of choosing differently, the moments of being unknown, all of that starts to compound into something. Not overnight, not dramatically, but quietly over time, something settles. You start to feel more like yourself, not the version of yourself that was performing well into something that you'd outgrown. Something quieter and more honest than that. A version that doesn't require much effort to maintain at all. The questions that felt destabilizing start to feel less urgent. Not because they've been answered, but because you've developed enough trust in the process to keep moving without needing certainty first. Growth doesn't announce itself while you're living it. You only recognize it looking back, at the moments where you chose differently and found out you were still standing. And something else shifts too. The way you relate to what you've built. What once felt like a cage starts to feel like a foundation, something that gave you skills, experience, and understanding that you carry forward into who you're becoming. The old identity doesn't disappear. It becomes part of the story of how you got here. And from that place, you could look at it with gratitude rather than resentment. You don't have to reject where you've been to embrace where you're going. Both can be true at the same time. And what opens up from here is something that most people underestimate when they're in the middle of it. Not just a new chapter, a life that actually feels like yours, built from what's true for you, not what you inherited, not what you performed, not what you became by default. That's the opportunity that lives inside the restlessness, inside the questions, inside the discomfort of becoming someone new. And that's worth every uncomfortable moment getting there. The restlessness wasn't a problem. It was the beginning of something that was always meant to be yours. Growing past who you've been doesn't mean that version of you was wrong. It means you've grown. And now you get to choose what comes next. And while we wrap up, just another reflection for you to think about here. Where are you sensing the pull towards a next version of yourself? And what would it take to start moving towards it? If something in this episode landed, and you're sensing that who you've been really good at being might not be who you're actually meant to become, a human design integration session is one of the ways to start exploring that. It's about understanding what's actually yours to build, not what you've inherited or mastered by default. The link is in the show notes. Have an amazing day. Before you go, I want to invite you to slow down for a moment and notice what stood out for you in this episode. There's nothing to do with it, no insight to apply, no conclusion to reach. Just notice what stayed with you. A phrase, a feeling, or a moment that felt familiar in your body. Sometimes the most important shifts don't happen through action, but through allowing something to be seen and felt. Thanks for taking this time for yourself. I'll see you next time.